Hello.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome everyone. Am I audible? Yes. Hello and welcome everyone. Today on this webinar of global trends in internal audit. For proceeding further, I would like to invite CA Kaushik Gada for giving his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Satya. Respected Central Council member and the Chairman of IASB Board, Charanjit Singh Nanda, in absentia, Central Council member and Vice Chairman of IASB Board, Yan Chandra Mishra ji, respected speakers, Milind Dimeji, Ms. Reddy sir, Sharma ji, and my dear friend Sazia. So welcome everyone to this very interesting topic on internal audit, global trends in the internal audit. And I really want to thank the chairman of IASB board for giving us this opportunity to host this very important topic. And in the current situation, when the technology has it's become a very integral part of our day-to-day operations. Internal controls and internal audits are very important, and at the right topic at the right time when the audits will definitely start now. And globally, what the internal audit standards are going on, globally, the internal audits are definitely accepted by all corporates, and it is very important, to have proper controls over the day-to-day transactions. And today's the learned speakers definitely enlighten all of us with this topic, and wish you all a very happy learning. Thank you, Sazia.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Moving on with the session, I invite our speaker, CA Milind Lemay, on the topic of Agile internal audit. He is a chartered accountant with over 25 years of experience in assurance and operational audit. Milind has always been in practice as chartered accountant and has carried various assignments in this field. Milind is also specialized in carrying due diligence review required by strategic investment and mergers and acquisitions. Milind also specializes in designing standard operating procedures for various business environments. Milind has completed his FAFD certification from ICAI and handles forensic audits in Kirtan and Pandit. Milind is a service line partner in charge of internal audit with Kirtan and Pandit LLP, where he has executed many assignments successfully in operational and management audit of multinational companies. Large businesses, houses in India works on various ERP platforms. Milind handles the internal and management audit assignments for companies in business houses, MNCs, software companies, and public sector enterprises. Milind has represented many papers on internal and management audit at various seminars and conferences organized by professional bodies. Milind has also contributed for many articles on internal and management audit for the magazines and newsletters published by various professional forums. Milind was secretary in the year 2004, 5, 6, 7 and vice chairman in the year 5 and 6 of Pune branch of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Currently, he has been co-opted as a member of Internal Audit Standards Board IASB of the ICI for the year 2020 and 21. By this introduction, I would like to invite our CA Milind Lemay. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sajia, for the introduction. Thank you, Mr. Kaushik Gada. And I also welcome my fellow faculties, Mr. Sharma and CA Reddy. Eventually, I would like to thank the IASB, Mr. Nanda and the entire team for coming out a very sensitive and important topic in the field of internal audits. And eventually, all the three lectures are interconnected with each other. So I'll be speaking on Agile internal audit. Then, of course, you know that Mr. Sharma is speaking on internal audit in how to do in this digitized era. And then what will be the role of internal auditors as advisors that we are going to hear from Mr. Reddy. And believe me, all these are really interconnected topics. So I hope all three of us will definitely try to value add to the viewers or the participants of this seminar. Let me start with my topic for today, which is on Agile internal audit. My screen is visible to all of you now. Yeah. So today, the theme is definitely global trends in internal audit, a look ahead. Really, it is a time to look ahead and let us now understand what is Agile internal audit. Now, before we understand agility and how the internal audit can be agile, let us understand the history of internal audits, how it started, in very, of course, in brief, so as to match that how internal audit function has evolved. It's a big time evolution which has happened over past 175 years, because since 1854, when the industrial revolution happened in the cotton manufacturing with steam power, we started in India because of the British rulers then. That brought in a lot of needs for the controls, as a lot of people were involved. The transactions were complicated, of course, at those levels, and that was the real need. That why, of course, there was a need of internal audit. It went on for quite some time, maybe more than 100, years. So post independence also, even though the manufacturing units were expanding gradually, India was coming up as a developing country, though there were a lot of challenges. But yes, volumes of supplies had increased, and the independent reviewer's thrust was placed on validation of transactions. But the whole stuff went on in a very rigid and kind of boxy manner till the economic reforms and globalization happened in 1991. Credit goes to the then rulers, but the whole gambit of Indian economy changed after this globalization. So the internal audit requirements changed dramatically. Let us, before we speak about this journey of internal audit from IA 1.0 to 4.0, as we are calling it now, let us first understand what is the origin of Agile. So, Agile, the word is coined in the software industry. So, originally a software development methodology, it used to aim, or it aims to reduce the costs and time. I have specifically underlined these words because we as members looking forward to practice in internal audit area need to remember these things, that on one side we have to reduce the costs and time on the both sides, of course, with client and as well as for us. But at the same time, we have to improve the quality. So while cutting on costs or cutting on time, the quality, forget compromising on the quality. In fact, it needs to improve. So the key characteristics of Agile include delivering tested products in the shorter iterations and involving internal customers during each iteration to refine the requirements. So during the session, we will come to this part, that how the shorter iterations or the continuous internal audit kind is required nowadays, or will be required in the days to come. So let us quickly understand how the internal audit function has evolved over a period of time. So what we call it as, or all of us, we call it as audit 1.0. Of course, those were the manual audit tools, pencils, green pens, calculators, all those who are attending this seminar or with me and my, let us say, contemporaries who are plus 50, they must have definitely done this manual kind of audit when almost 1 meter length kind of ledgers, red color ledgers were there. And if you have to really audit the very first transaction on the page, you have to stand up from your chair and then only you can reach physically to that transaction. Those were the days. What was 1.0, we'll understand in next slide quickly. But then it involved, post 1991, it involved as audit 2.0, or what we call is as risk-based internal audit, where computerization had taken place in a big way. we started using IT audit tools like Excel or any other CAD, that is computer-aided audit tools, softwares, of course, for auditing. The whole gambit changed. Now, for past few years, we are also talking of Audit 3.0, which included data in audit analytics tools. So data became important, more and more important. How you are handling the data, how far you are gathering the data, and how far you are analyzing that data. So analytical apps like Python and everything, they came as part of Audit 3.0. And now the agility, what we will be discussing in today's session, has come because of this Audit 4.0. Now, Audit 4.0 is in sync with Industry 4.0 or IR 4.0, typically because of semi and progressive automation of various audit tools, RPAs, that is robotic process automation, sensors, IoTs, Internet of Things, Internet of Services, RFIDs, GPS, everything will be part of our audit tool henceforth, because the data, analyzing that data in shorter iterations and coming out with reduced cost and time and with effective quality or improved quality. This all will be required by this IA 4.0 now. To quickly catch up with the whole thing once again, internal audit 1.0 was primarily transaction audit. Usually it used to be like if the statutory auditors were asked that how much sample generally you would be covering this year. Yes, those were the questions asked to the statutory auditors at the beginning of the year. So if the statutory auditor decides to go for 20% sample size, then internal auditor was asked to cover remaining 80. And it was purely transaction audit, not whatever happening before the transaction, not known, whatever happening after the transaction, not known. Just look at the paper, see whether all the things are in place, and say, yes, go ahead. That was the requirement. So it was to support statutory auditors in no productive results, no value addition. So, well, overall operations and functional interrelationship was out of question. But then 1991, as we discussed, internal audit 2.0 came, or it evolved after that. Of course, it was there in Western countries or the developed countries much earlier than India. But when we opened the economy, naturally, all these techniques and requirements also piggybacked along with that economic development. So the risk-based internal auditing in its initial era focused more on the substantive testing of transaction flow, focused on accuracy. Now transaction flow is very much important because now we started checking the entire flow of the transaction. So if we are talking of purchase, in earlier periods, one used to check the bill, whether the rate is correct, quantity is correct, total is correct, tax is charged perfectly, accounting entries are correct, then authorized by various authorities. Okay, go ahead. Now it was end-to-end checking of the transactions. So right from purchase requisition to the bill payment, in between whatever happened, whether the material has been received properly, the GRNs, the quality checks, the rejections, the POs, the rates, the share of business, so many things started coming in as part of internal audit 2.0, and we started focusing on the entire process as a whole. So the necessity for cost optimization, efficiency in resource utilization, timely and reliable information were the main ingredients of this audit 2.0. Of course, internal audit 2.0 is still there. I would say that 1.0 is almost vanished. No more manual checking. Of course, everybody is in the computerized area, digitized area. So manual things are almost vanished. So 2.0 definitely exists. And believe me, even if we talk about agile internal audit 2.0 is going to continue. It will not lose its importance because primarily the focus is on process-based audit. So all these COSO framework, of course, came in. GRC, governance, risk and compliance, laid down certain principles, and internal audit 2.0, or the risk-based internal audit, became a very important factor for any good organization. Over last 10 years, or the turn of 21st century, last 2 decades, when data has become new oil, the need for improvement in 2.0 was definitely there. On one side, lot many things were becoming, automatic. So many processes were automated. On other side, they were taking care of a lot of risks, which were observed during the first decade of internal audit 2.0. Those risks were mitigated, automated. So now the question came that, is internal audit going to lose its importance? No, in fact, the importance has increased. So on one side, we need reliable and timely data analytics, not only optimize resources, but also helps organization in effective decision making. So this data analytics has become part of our internal audit, internal controls. And when so many things are automated, one thing cannot be eliminated at any point in time is the human brain, human involvement by way of the decision making. No human, no person will allow a computer or robot to take some decision regarding his organization. Of course, few routine operations can be entrusted to the machines, but the strategic decisions will always remain with the human brains. And that is where this internal audit 3.0 comes in picture. So very structured data collection and analysis leading to helping in the decision making was the crux of internal audit 3.0. It is still there. Lot many large companies, they are using internal audit services as IA 3.0 now. And perhaps Mr. Reddy would guide us more that how CAs as internal auditors can act as advisors. As I said, so far we are contributing in the decision making. He will be definitely speaking in detail, and I am also eagerly waiting to hear him. So 4.0 now is, as I said, it works on the principles of IR, Industrial Revolution 4.0. So Industry 4.0 consists of 6 technological principles. Interoperability, that is inter-task or inter-operation changeability, virtualization, decentralization, real-time capability, instant or agile. Once again, now this agile internal audit, how it is connected with this IR 4.0 or Industry 4.0 is the main key is here, that real-time capability, which makes it very instant or agile. So on one side, when the operations or industry is becoming agile, naturally the industry internal audit has to sync with it. Service orientation, service focus. So all these efforts, why we are taking all these efforts? All these efforts of Industry 4.0 are focused towards providing appropriate or very timely, very high level of service to the end customers. But believe me, this is not related to the service industry as such. Even let us say a company who is manufacturing, which is manufacturing, let us say refrigerator. What actually they give a good, when they give a good, very good high quality product to its end user, a refrigerator to a lady or in a house, they are actually providing a very high level of service to that lady. Okay, so just look at your refrigerator, that what type of services, offerings, facilities it has. Any car nowadays, the cars are almost semi-automatic. They guide you if you are cutting the lane. They stop you if, or they ask you to reduce the speed if you are overspeeding. So many information flows even when you are driving. What is the weather today? By voice commands, you can just open the windows or open the sunroof and all. So these are all services offered even by a product. So the service orientation has increased to a great level when it comes to Industry 4.0. And of course, while doing that, everything is flexible. So modularity is definitely required. And I 4.0 relies on these 6 principles to increase data availability, enable continuous data monitoring and validation. This is where the agility comes, that enable continuous data monitoring and validation, and of course, improve the automation in the audit process so that that agility and the level of agility, quality of the agility is maintained. So let us understand what are the elements of agility. So some elements in agility we understand is deliver deeper insights to the strategic business issues and risks. Uh, Time and again, when I was saying that we need to participate in decision making. So when we do this agile internal auditing, we have to deliver deeper insights to the strategic business issues and risks. So on one side, the data is continuously flowing, the continuous analysis is going on, and the exceptions of this data analyzed are to be tested and what you can say analyzed in such a manner that even before anything happens in a big manner, those issues are immediately addressed and settled on one side. When it comes to strategic business issues and risks, sorry, these kind of inputs from internal audits are very important. Then respond rapidly to the changing priorities and emerging issues. Now, when all the suppliers and customers, they are interconnected, particularly OEMs and their ancillaries, they are connected in a very high level of connectivity has been established these days. The OEMs have installed their own softwares at the end of their suppliers, and everything is exchanged through that particular software. One needs to upload the delivery challan in the portal. Then the customer, the OEM accepts, yes, please deliver this. Then supplier sends that material just in time. You must have heard for this many times. The just in time supplies are taking place. Now, when the priorities and issues are changing, the whole system gets changed, and one needs to adjust itself, otherwise things will collapse. So responding rapidly to changing priorities is very important. Become forward looking in anticipating risks. Yes, risk anticipation is very important. There is no point for anybody to say that no, I am completely protected from risk, or there were okay, Mr. Auditor, even if you are showing me this is as something as a risk, I don't think this is a risk. So you need to be a forward looking. Okay, of course, we can deliberate on that, no doubt, as client and internal auditor, but anticipating those risks is very important. Then move to more risk-based audit planning and fieldwork, which we are doing as it is right from our IA 2.0 days. So audit planning and fieldwork is definitely there. But the difference in IA 2.0 and IA 4.0 or the Agile internal audit now is Agile internal audit is almost real time. Earlier, we used to gather the data, generate various reports, run those reports through our audit tools or Excel, identify exceptions, and based on those exceptions, we used to define the risks involved in a particular type of transaction or a particular set of transactions, let us say, or in a particular process. It was not really post-mortem, but yes, it was not real time as well. So it used to happen during the year. The clients were having sufficient time to overcome those issues. But by the time, if we okay, if we identify say 100 exceptions, by the time we analyze and issue our report, another 200 such events used to take place. So still it was lagging behind the actual flow of transactions, but now it has to be very much agile, that is real time. So by the time you observe the any exception, analyze it, and before even another 3 or 4 happen, you have to mitigate those. That will be the speed of this agile internal audit. Now for that, you will have to streamline the work papers. Everything, of course, it has to happen in a shorter span, uh, shorter period. So everything, the definition of this audit plan has to be such that the things move almost in a real time. So streamlining the work papers, of course, it is required for us as internal auditors, also comes as a part of this agility in the internal audits. When this happens, of course, we have to deliver a very impactful, relevant, timely, readable, and visual reports. Readable and visual reports we have discussed on various forums. Almost all the members now, they are well equipped to deliver the readable and visual reports. But the timeliness, many times it happens even today, some of the senior members in the industry, they still believe that the number of transactions, more the number of transaction, better is the audit quality. Actually, it is not. When it comes to agile internal audit, this more the number that won't even exist because it is real time. The moment you come across some exception, it is to be reported. So there could be hardly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cases max. And before another 3, 4, 5 cases happen, those are to be mitigated. So that relevant timeliness has now gathered the importance rather than the number of cases observed around your observation. So if that is gone, of course, it carries the importance. More the number of cases, you are more prone to certain things. But that doesn't mean that the level of criticality will depend only on the number of exceptions you have observed. There will be other factors, that how far that exception is going to dent the company's operations, how far it is going to bother the top line, how far it is going to affect the bottom line, how far it is going to affect the legal structure. And now we will discuss that agility of this internal audit is going to take away this internal audit as only CA kind of function. We'll discuss in the next slide. But this timeliness, relevance, and impactful delivery of the reports is very much important. Access to applicable skill sets for the project in hand. Now, applicable skill sets means what? Yes, as a chartered accountants, we and as a internal auditors specifically, we know, we understand a lot of business requirements, but that is to the extent of supporting our core function. But when now we are talking about the exceptions which is gathered through the data, now data which is, I will take you back, coming from all these RPAs and sensors and IoTs and RFIDs and GPSs, it is not chartered accountant who will be having all the skill sets. Nobody requires also. Nobody is expecting that chartered accountant is an engineer, is a chemical engineer. I mean, of course, there are mechanical and chemical and so many software engineers. No. If you are doing a pharmacy, nobody will expect that you are some kind of pharmacist or a doctor. But the skill sets need to be there in your team. So the deep and specialized skill sets, particularly in cyber and analytics, are definitely required as a part of agile internal auditing team. This whole thing is now requiring us to re-engineering our audit function. With this increased use of RPAs, sensors, IoTs, and factories becoming smart, the business world is moving forward towards a highly automated, highly flexible, and highly interconnected environment with real-time capabilities of corporation, fault detection, prediction, and decision making. So on one side now, That is still not there in India because of various reasons. But in foreign countries, particularly in the USA, even a car gets manufactured based on the order received. So if we are talking about, let us say, Marutis in India, they decide that this week, let us say, we will have production of Maruti Altos for this week on, say, line number one. And then it goes on continuously. One after other, Maruti Alto will keep coming the entire week. The colors will be decided based on their market understanding, that which color is in more demand, which color is preferred less. But basis that they have to balance, and they decide that, okay, out of 5,000, 4,000 should be white, another 800 should be in gray color, and remaining 200 can go with some red or some black, all these colors. That is decided. In the US, if you order for, let us say, for a Ford vehicle, you have to fill up a form again online, that, okay, I want this model, I want these types of tires, I want this type of machine capacity, these features, and this color. The order goes to the production robotics, and all the robotics, they will gather the required parts for this particular order. They will have that color available, and everything will be prepared on with real time analysis, sorry, real time gathering of all this stuff. And whatever time it requires for manufacturing, say with 3 days, within next fourth day, that vehicle will be delivered to you in whatever manner you want. Now, when 5,000 constant number or the of one particular vehicle is flowing, various factors involved in material movement, the inventory, the procurement, the sales, the data flow was also equally static. Though it was continuous, it was static because it was pre-decided that, now, okay, this is the set of transactions are going to happen in next 8 days or 1 week. The audit was also equally used to be that static in its speed, because, okay, whatever happened in that particular job order, we used to analyze, and we used to tell the management that these were the issues, these rejections were not taken care of, etc. But when there is no batch, every single vehicle is going to be one single work order. The movement of material is going to be very agile. The procurement, if some material is not available in the stock, immediately the order goes to the supplier that, yes, I want these parts immediately. Those are supplied. Everything is automated. And then there are exceptions which are to be captured there and there, because if that doesn't happen, that will create problem for another 10 vehicles in next 10 days. One cannot afford. Typically, when the competition is very high and when you are servicing your end customers by delivering the product. So every industry has now become a service industry. Though it is a manufacturing industry, it has become a service industry. In that particular era, the audit function has also to be syncing with the whole stuff. So the auditing profession should adapt to this wave of changes, leverage on emerging technologies to enlarge the scope of auditing, shorten the timing, improve accuracy, and eventually enhance the assurance level of the whole business world. Uh, well, when it comes to the audit scope, we will have procurement as the area, sales as the area, inventory management as the area. Primarily for manufacturing companies, these three are the backbone activities. In IA 2.0 kind of area, we give once or twice reports on these areas depending on the requirement of management. But henceforth, it will be a series of reports based on maybe one or two exceptions will have to be there, because it has to shorten the timing and improve the accuracy, right? So we have to adopt with all this step. And as I said, this is no more a CA only function. Of course, it will be driven by us, because particularly the auditing part which is our core strength of all of us, that will always remain with us. So it will be a CA-driven function wherein various technical experts will be required to contribute towards the outcome. So henceforth, when it comes to internal audit team, it won't be a partner, a senior assignment manager, and couple of junior managers, and maybe a team of articles. That won't be the scenario henceforth. There can be a mechanical engineer. If you are handling a chemical industry or client from chemical products, you will have to have a chemical engineer, maybe a pharmacist if you are doing some pharmacy, pharma company. These kind of, if you are into a software company, maybe you will require some cyber experts or IT security experts as part of your CA team. So this re-engineering of audit function is required. It is a good time that IASB has brought in this particular issue for discussion, because it is the right time for all of us to pull up the socks, because this is not far away. Believe me, another 3 to 5 years, all of us would be required to carry out agile internal audit of whatever size of our clients we are handling. And it's good that the issue has been brought to the discussion. And I thank IASB, Mr. Nanda and his team for giving me this opportunity to share my views about the agile internal audit. I will continue with this session, and I want to listen to my fellow faculties. And together we will answer your questions at the end of this particular session. So for as of now, thank you very much. Over to you, Sajia.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insights on agile internal audit. We actually learned how the industry is, moving fast from, internal audit 2.0 to our industry 4.0, and we have to move on with that. And that's why we have to re-engineer our audit processes and everything to match the industry expectation. Thank you so much, sir, for that.
Thank you very much.
Moving forward, I would like to invite our next session member, C. Shri VGSV Sharma, on the topic of internal audit in the era of digitalization. So, to give the brief about this session person, the Mr. VGSV is, as he is generally called, as a retired BCom honors CMA professional with more than 34 enterprise risk, compliance, forensic, and business process consulting domain. Industry experience time span is for Big Four consulting, manufacturing, telecom, IT technology, retail, FMCG, and travel with wide international experience. Some of the key organizations that he served, including Tata Timken, Godrej, Escotel, Mobile Communication, Aircel, Deloitte, HCL Technologies Limited. As a passionate speaker at various forums on wide range topics on internal audit, enterprise risk, and forensics. Post his retirement, he is currently running his own management consulting firm. With this brief introduction, I would like to welcome our speaker, Shri VGSV Sharma. Over to you, sir.
Once. Are you able to see the screen? Great, thank you so much, Limaya Sab. I think it was a wonderful session. I think you captured all the fundamentals and the essentials of internal audit in the digitization space. So I think my topic today is internal audit in the area of digitization. As Limaya Sab rightly said, pretty much the internal audit function, all the aspects of the businesses are actually moving towards digitization. If you look at any of the processes, they run on IT and technology, and therefore internal audit function will have to reinvent itself to be able to meet the audit requirements, to be able to provide requisite assurance. So with this background, we will move on, directly jump into the presentation slides. And let us look at what is the fundamental objectives of an internal control, because that is what internal auditors typically deal with day in, day out. As Limaya Saab rightly I did mentioned in his presentation, the fundamental objectives include safeguarding of assets. It's very important that whatever assets that the organization procures, they are all safeguarded and they are all duly accounted for. Reliability of financial statements, and I don't need to explain this. With the kind of financial frauds, white collar crimes that we have seen, it becomes imperative that relevant financial controls are continuously assessed and reported to ensure reliability of financial statements. Compliance to local laws and regulations, because especially in organizations which operate in multiple geographies, I think this becomes a much bigger challenge, and we need to learn how to deal with it. Improve the effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Again, a point touched by Mr. LeMay. Internal auditors are no more tick the checkbox kind of a thing. I'm sure I think Mr. Reddy will cover this in a little more detail. As an advisory role, how do you support the management and the operations in improving their efficiency and effectiveness? Fraud has been a major issue. While detection of fraud is not the responsibility of an auditor, any auditor, be it a stat auditor or an internal auditor, but if he or she comes across, an internal auditor comes across any fraud indicators, then I think the internal auditor or any auditor is expected to act and take it to a logical conclusion, depending whether there's any merit to investigate this further and to take it forward. Business continuity has been a major area which is evolving, especially in the present times. And all of us, we have seen what COVID has done to us. And similarly, there are a lot of natural calamities, and then you have some of these uncontrollable, unforeseen events which result in business disruption. So how do you overcome this? How do you make sure that you have a robust business continuity plan? Safety and reliability of data and information. Mr. LeMay also touched upon cyber. So anything which is in a digitized form, which is stored in the computer or as a digital data, I think they all would be exposed to cybercrime. So these are the fundamental objectives, and pretty much all the activities would get bucketed and one or more of these fundamental objectives of internal audit. And therefore, if you look at the last line, I mentioned that digitization of controls will automatically, you call it digitization or automation, I'm using the word digitization very loosely, will automatically impact the risk landscape. And obviously, the kind of audit procedures that you would perform would also undergo a change. Evolution of digitization. Why was this important? As globalization started taking over, you have to be competitive in the marketplace. You have to be agile, as Mr. LeMay rightly said. You need to respond quickly to the markets. Therefore, I've actually penned down, again, this is by no means exhaustive, but illustrative. It gives you a fair sense in terms of what were the fundamental reasons why digitization started happening at such a fast rate. I remember in 1991 when computers were introduced in India, not many people adopted it. But then as time progressed, it became a necessity. So let's look at some of the reasons, or the driving factors for digitization. Attrition. If it becomes individual dependent, obviously you will have business disruption. You will have some of the processes struggling to complete their tasks. Productivity enhancement. I think Mr. LeMay touched upon this in his presentation. Every individual or a human would have his or her own limitation. But once you mechanize it, once you automate it, so we started off with CNC lathe machines, and that's the beginning that I had seen of automation. So I think then what happens is that the rejections will be lower. I'm talking from a manufacturing kind of an environment. The rejections will be lower, the quality will be much better, and then production capacities also would significantly go up. Therefore, the utilization, so enhancement. So Now, when you use computers, when you use automation, obviously the productivity of an auditor would also go up, so that you don't have to perform all those mundane tasks that you were earlier doing. I remember when I started my career, Mr. Lemay mentioned about day books, journals. I have seen that phase, where we were typing on typewriters, the entire trial balance, the balance sheet, the journal books, the day books. I mean, it was a nightmare, because one mistake in the typing, again, you have to redo this whole thing, and then you need to relook at every number. You need to manually add. We used to have, not only, we never had calculators in those days. We were having these calculating machines. So and then you take a printout, you keep taking. I mean, it's a nightmare. Consistency. One of the advantages of automation is that whatever it is, good, bad, ugly, you will see consistent results. And as we say in the audit parlance, garbage in, garbage out. If you get your processes right, if you get your systems right, and if you can ensure quality of input, you get a quality output. And consistently, you get that. Ease of archival retrieval. Imagine, especially when the income tax says that you need to archive everything for 8 years, the volume of physical papers that you need to carry. I have seen situations where some of these godowns either got flooded, you had this rodent or pest attack, and then you had fires, you name it, I have seen it all. And it becomes a nightmare to actually manage, archive, and then retrieval is another challenging task. In terms of how do you number them, how do you store them or archive them, and then how do you retrieve them whenever there is an income tax assessment, or there can be multiple reasons as to why you might have to retrieve them. Speed of decision making is a point that Mr. Lemay also touched in his earlier presentation. If you have information data either in the visual form or in the data form, it helps you to take appropriate business or strategic decisions. So that is the key today, to be able to take timely decisions. And this is one of the reasons why your SAPs of the world have actually gained traction insofar as their implementation is concerned, because as it is called enterprise resource management, they're all ERM software. So these are all resources. How optimally, efficiently you start using these resources. And how do you do that? Through a faster decision-making process. It addresses complex algorithms, and especially, when you look at some of the applications like SIM or now that you have artificial intelligence and machine learning, when you design these algorithms, now they are very complex. And an ordinary computer would, it's not humanly possible for somebody to actually look at various permutations and combinations to be able to arrive at a decision. So when you have data in a digital form, you can directly apply these algorithms and get immediate results in a jiffy. Cost reduction. So this definitely helps in reducing manpower, enhancing productivity, and therefore the efficiency. 24/7 deployment. This again has some kind of a touch point with your attrition or hiring delays or non-availability of some of the requisite skills. That is taken care through digitization. Exception detection. I think Mr. Lemay also spoke about how do you audit through exception. So you don't have to actually pick up a sample, even though we do in certain situations, and there are reasons why we do it. But when you look at continuous monitoring kind of an approach that you have, where, based on the design of the algorithm, it all automatically throws up any exception. That's exactly how the fraud detection or fraud management applications or systems work. So it all throws up the exceptions, and the level of accuracy of those exceptions will decide the level of reliability of those applications. You don't want a situation where you have 1,000 transactions being thrown up as an exception, and when you look at all those 1,000 transactions, you just come up either with one or none. I think that's not a good situation to be in, right? It can handle huge volumes of data. No need to explain this. Complex data structures. Imagine if we typically call this as data lake. If your data resides in multiple forms. It could be pictures, it could be scanned documents, it could be Word documents, it could be Excel, it could be email, even you name it. It can actually pull out the relevant information or data and then collates everything to put up a logical report for you to assess and then act upon. Ease of integration and interface. This is so very important because when you have to interface or connect multiple applications to be able to mine multiple types of data or data residing in multiple applications or systems, it becomes extremely easy. Otherwise, you need to physically move around. Whereas if you can archive, all you have to do is, even though the data sits in different places, resides in different locations, you need not have to physically travel. All you have to do is interconnect them, and then you can do whatever that you want to do sitting at one place. Performance of dashboards. Mr. LeMay also talked about visualization. So this is all about dashboards, either in numerical or data form or in pictorial form. Whatever is logically, it makes sense, right? So with this, we move on to the next slide. Now, evolving, I'm only talking from an internal audit perspective. Whatever that you see in this box here, these are typically the technologies that internal auditors today are dealing with, while the rest are all evolving, but not so much that we should be concerned today. 3D printing and cognitive augmented is also taking, they are all evolving, especially in the gaming industry. But if somebody is managing gaming industry, definitely I think these are the technologies that one should be aware of. We talked about Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation. It's nothing but they're all rule-based, but then we call it as robotic process automation. Whereas the classical example of a robo is something which would perform these physical tasks in a manufacturing kind of an environment. Optical character recognition has taken up big time because one of the reasons is that if somebody imagine you having a battery of people just to process vendor invoices, somebody will have to go through it, read it, and then type it in your system. That takes hell a lot of time. These OCRs actually scan the document irrespective of the nature of the document or the template. It scans and then directly starts posting into your financial management system. Drones have actually taken off big time now for various commercial operations. And so they come with their own set of risks. Cloud definitely has emerged as a go-to technology today because it becomes logically that much more easier. Secondly, apart from your internal crowd, there are a lot of providers who actually provide these services today. So it's easier for you to quickly launch your products or upload your applications and start working. Blockchain is something which is evolving today. At least in the corporate sector, it hasn't actually taken off. But this technology still is at a very nascent stage. People are still trying to struggle and understand as to how this would happen. While this technology has been loaned from Bitcoin or crypto, but then how do you want to use it? How do you want to leverage this particular technology? Well, it has already been implemented in certain areas, but then corporates are still trying to find out as to how they would go ahead and implement this. Now, let us look at internal controls in digitized landscape. I hope you are able to view the slides. There's a lot of noise on this slide in terms of having a lot of data. But I hope you will understand. Now, IoT is a technology that we very much use today. And its applications have only grown in recent times. Similarly, I'm using just AI, but then it could be artificial intelligence or machine learning or deep learning, whatever you call it. I mean, it's all pretty much one and the same. Now, typically IoT has, while the technology brings in a lot of benefits to the end user or to the consumer, it has its own inherent risks. Mind you, whatever that I'm saying, it is not exhaustive, but it gives you a fair idea in terms of where you need to look at when you do your audit planning, what are the areas that you really need to concentrate? Security. Now, it could be your access controls, or it could be your network architecture or the firewalls, which is all related to your information security or database security, network security, technology vulnerability, right? So this is both interrelated. So do you have any vulnerabilities? I tell you where these actually come from and where we need to be extremely cautious. Coding protocols. I think this is one of the major contributors for technology vulnerability, especially when you develop applications in-house, or when you buy off-the-shelf products, or when you use some of these freewares. Hacking, ransom, I think most of you would have seen, these are all part of your cybercrime. Vendor support, mostly relating to your vendors who actually will have to help you in fixing the problems. So you provide accesses, and then most times what happens, you forget withdrawing those accesses. We have seen issues with that. Their training, employee training becomes extremely critical. Information and data security is again part of your security part. How safe and secure is your data when you transmit, or when you archive it, or when you move it? Spoofing is again nothing but one of the ways by which somebody can actually intercept your data. Even if it is encrypted, you have a lot of applications today which can decrypt and then steal the information on data. Litigations and penalties. This happens mostly whenever there is a data theft or an identity theft. Then you end up, especially in a multi-geography kind of a situation. I'm sure, I think in India also we will have that once the privacy laws get introduced. Now they are withdrawn. Similarly, RPAs and AI. What are the risks that we know of? How do we know that the results are relevant? What happens is that whenever we see an output from a computer, we presume that everything is honky-dory and we immediately start jumping into the analysis. I have multiple instances where when we went back and looked at the data integrity, I think we had issues with it, either in terms of its accuracy or completeness. I think that's a problem. And this is a continuous process, because what happens is change is constant. And therefore, the change management controls become so very important. Whenever you upgrade, you make modifications to an existing application. Now, RPA is nothing but a rule-based thing. So there's nothing robotic about it. So if those rules are changed or somebody interferes with them, then obviously the outputs also will undergo a change. Artificial intelligence is heavily dependent on your historical data, because based on the data and the decisions that you have taken for those combinations, it creates a library as to what did you do when you had 3-4 different combinations, and then picks up from the directory, from the library, as to what is the most appropriate action that it should initiate. So it's based on the percentage of success, right? So if that data, historical data, is incorrect, then you have a problem with AI. What AI would do is that it would actually prepare a table in such a way that if there's a combination of A, B, C, then D is the action that was performed. But if there is an integrity issue with that, any of the data points pertaining to A, B, or C, the D will be incorrect. Because that's how it prepares an actually a success table. It creates a library. And then what it does is it tries to compare. Okay, if next time, whenever there's a combination of A, B, C, I need to perform D. That's how AI works. And therefore, it keeps on updating its library. That's what we call as artificial intelligence, or continuous learning, machine learning is what we call. Accuracy of algorithms. This is extremely critical, because the entire output is dependent on the accuracy with which the algorithms are designed, and the integrity of these algorithms. And therefore, your access, your ITGC related controls become so very critical, in addition to various other things. Unauthorized changes I just spoke about. Effects of upgrades and changes is also something that we spoke about, because what happens is that you upgrade a particular technology, a particular rule or an algorithm, and then you forget to do an effective impact assessment. We look at it. What are the things that we will have to do? Now, some of the recommended audit considerations to address some of these risks. And I have put it as pretty much common because most of these are all IT based or IT dependent, and therefore I didn't try to segregate it. And if I expand this, I don't think this 45-minute session would be enough. And any IT expert or a cyber expert will tell you the quantum of work that you will have to do will be immense, right? But some of the pointers that I'm trying to bring here will help you to actually identify the areas that you probably might want to concentrate upon when you work on some of these IT related areas. So the first thing is, I think we will have to identify the business critical, prepare a business critical list of assets, IT assets and infrastructure that is all connected to IoT, the Internet of Things, or on which AI algorithms are being introduced, or where AI algorithms are running. So once you complete this task, so once you understand the business, once you understand what are all the various IT infrastructure and assets that are connected or running using IoT as a technology enabler, then you will have to look at some of these aspects in terms of the risks. Data privacy is something that you have to be extremely cautious about, and more so when the organization is operating in multiple geographies. So is information security, data privacy, information security, pretty much these two sides of the same coin. I would say data privacy is nothing but a subset of your information security. Password and identity management, who is accessing, who has accesses. I mean, you need to have very, very strong controls. You don't want a situation, you provided a remote access to one of the vendors to for the maintenance purposes and you forgot to revoke it, or you forgot to revoke the accesses or credentials of your ex-employees or contractual staff. I think you have various combinations in this, and make sure that you have a good IDAM or identity management application, which actually ensures that only authorized people are authorized, either to change the program or amend the program or push data, perform any of the activities. The other one is network architecture and security interfaces. What is the design of your network? How vulnerabilities can somebody have you opened up any windows? Most times what happens is that when you design a network security architecture, you might have closed all the doors that you see. Those are big gaping holes. You might leave out some of these smaller windows, and that is what is typically exploited. And this happens mostly when you have multiple applications which get interconnected. And typically in IoT or in as we spoke earlier, because of the ease of interface and you want to actually run complex algorithms to provide meaningful data or information to the management, you interface multiple applications, and that is when you have some of these problems. You leave out some of the vulnerabilities which get exploited by the hackers. So security again, I just use the word security, be it your server related security or database related security. I mean, there are a bunch of things that you'll have to do, right from server hardening onwards, your firewalls, your antivirus, you name it. I think some are people dependent, some are process dependent, some are technology dependent. Secure coding protocols, and having come from an IT kind of a company, I can tell you this creates havoc, because you design not only clients and customers, but also in-house. And if you do not follow secure coding protocols, you are in big time trouble. And this actually leaves a lot of vulnerability for a potential hacker to hack in. And because you haven't actually followed the designed protocol while designing an application, these need to be thoroughly tested. You need to have experienced people who will test it multiple times to make sure that these are robust and can defend the organization. Vendor contracts and vendor risk compliance, more from your vendor support whenever you provide accesses, whenever they are installing. I think that's when you have to have a robust contract to make sure that if there is any leakage of data, or if the organization suffers because of any lacuna, you're well covered from your vendor contract perspective. Training, I cannot tell you how critical and important this training is, because when you look at some of these vulnerabilities, they are either technology, people, or process dependent, one among the three. And people play a big part, because most times out of ignorance, it could be some of these innocuous mails which you open, and then you end up downloading all these malwares, and then it opens up a huge vulnerability. Somebody will steal the data, somebody will take charge of your application system, servers, and then all the ramifications will start happening. So employee training becomes extremely critical, and this has to be done on a constant basis. It cannot be that you do it once and then you forget about it. It has to be done on a regular basis. So to make sure that they're fully aware in terms of do's and do nots. Some is something which is very, very popular, and it's actually an intrusion detection system, which means that if somebody is trying to gain an unauthorized entry into your network, it immediately detects. So it will have multiple touch points. It has very complex algorithms. Again, this is something like a fraud management system, where it looks at your past data and then builds up some kind of a digital signature to identify any potential intrusion or a threat, or whether that intrusion is a permitted, a genuine intrusion, or it's an external intrusion with some malafide intent. So I think though these systems are actually becoming extremely common, this is an area that need to be audited to make sure that whatever false positives that it throws up, or the positives, I would say, it throws up, many of them have translated into real-time intrusion, or whether they're all false positives. Let's presume that you have implemented a system and it is working at an accuracy of 95%, which means out of 100 alerts, 95 are coming out to be true as genuine intrusions. You will have to go back to the drawing board to find out exactly the source of these intrusions, and what is actually, how did the system detect, whether there is anything else that still need to be done. Because hackers are always innovative. So it's always a catch-up with a hacker, and most of them are highly intelligent. So you need to go back. And imagine that if there was a genuine intrusion which has happened, which the system failed to detect, then you have to go back to the drawing board and relook at the algorithm to make sure that you correct it, and so that those scenarios are also built in. Incident management. So we just spoke about. So whenever there is an incident, you need to investigate. You need to come out as you need to identify the root cause, and then you need to fix it. Next, freeware. This is another big nuisance. Almost every employee today has a laptop or a desktop at their workplaces, and people are very innovative to download some of these freewares, games, and all kinds of things, or downloading software from unauthorized sites. And what this does is that it exposes the organization to malwares and all kinds of viruses, trojans, you name it. And that is where the problem starts. And this is where you also need to have a very strong detection system within an organization, whether it is an off-the-shelf product or a homegrown, which will identify any potential download which is not authorized by the organization or from an authorized source, so that it protects the organization from any potential risk. Device management. This is again another area which is completely overlooked. Device management is, how do you dispose of your IT assets? Do you dispose of the IT assets with the client information and data residing in it? How do you make sure that you completely wipe off the data? Who do you give it for wiping off the data? How do you know that the data has been wiped? Do you make sure that you destroy the hard drive before you dispose of the IT assets? I mean, some of these processes are very, very complex, but they're extremely critical, extremely critical to make sure that you have a very strong disposal or retirement, because a lot of organizations, what they do is that after every few years, it could be 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, they refresh your IT asset, because the assets have become old, and then they would issue a new laptop. They will configure a new laptop and then take away the old ones. What happens to it? What happens to the client, the organization specific or data residing in it? I think those becomes extremely critical rather than the value of the asset itself. configuration controls. I have seen multiple instances where just before the inception of the audit, everything has been window dressed and the bride has been well dressed up. You go there, you do an audit and come back and everything looks hunky-dory. You come back and suddenly you realize that all those controls have been diluted open and they're all configuration related, be it an SAP or any application. So I think this is a big problem unless and until you have a very, very robust mechanism. SIM can play a great role where it can track the logs. Suppose if somebody has accessed any of the tables or any of the rules or any of the configurations. For example, let me give you an example that you have configured a bank account for a particular vendor. And tomorrow, what I do, I go and change that bank account to my bank account number and silently keep quiet. Tomorrow, whatever invoices you process for the vendor, payments will start coming to me. And after a few days, you again go back and change it. Nobody will know. Because at the table level, it doesn't capture the changes. That's a problem. But then the logs will have this as to who accessed and what changes were made. It will not tell you exactly what number you put, but it will say that somebody went and accessed the table. So that is where you need to have a timely detection system. It should be able to, where the system should be able to throw up real-time alerts, and either by way of an email or an SMS to all the critical individuals in the system that somebody went and did something here. So that the concerned official or the person or authorized person can go and investigate and see whether it was a genuine intrusion. I will not call it as an intrusion, whether it was a genuine change or which required, we went through a due approval process, or whether it's done with some nullified intent. SDLC, change management, these are so very critical. Change management, I'm using again very loosely. Some of these are all bucketed under, we have bucketed them, but then they would translate into multiple actions. Now, how do you do a change management right from the coding to testing, user acceptance, input, output, version control, you name it, and there are a bunch of things. We talked about coding protocols in place. If it is a homegrown application, SDLCs, again, right from the time you understand the requirement under the coding, the designing, coding, testing, and then putting it into the production, monitoring, all of that, is part of your SDLC. There are multiple things that you need to check before you push anything into the production, because it would have huge ramification in terms of managing that process. Impact assessment is so very important, which is what I just mentioned about the impact it would have on the process and the way it manages. So an output of one application could be an input for the another. So when you make a change in one application, you need to do an impact assessment to see whether it would impact any other application which has some kind of a touch point with the parent application, or any downstream or even an upstream application. I think that becomes very, very critical. Because upstream application, it pulls data from the upstream applications or application and then processes it and pushes it to the next downstream application or applications. So either ways, I think there can be a problem. So somebody will have to do an impact assessment before at the design stage itself and at the testing stage before signing off on the user acceptance. Version control is again a major area of concern for an internal audit, especially where you have these homegrown applications and you do not know which is the latest version. And if you do not have adequate version control, which are well documented, you are in some big time trouble. I've seen situations where disgruntled employees just walked away from an office, carrying with them the coding scripts, and then you are left with nothing. So God forbid tomorrow if there's a BCP, business continuity kind of a situation, or whenever the application crashes for whatever reason, either because of an upgrade or whatever, I think you're in for some big time trouble because you do not have the latest version of that script. And you can imagine the kind of business disruption it would have or it would create. Okay, so now we come to OCR, drones and cloud technology. I'm covering it at a very, very high level. OCR, optical character reading, is what we discussed. Incorrect, one of the risks is incorrect, incomplete posting of data. We have seen initially, whenever it was implemented, a lot of challenges in terms of the accuracy of data, the accuracy of posting into the application, to the financial application. So primarily because either it was unable to recognize some of the templates or some of the fonts. You have all kinds of permutations and combinations, but what you need to do is that you need to very closely monitor, track, to make sure that it reaches some stage of stability. And it takes time. These applications do take time. Incorrect posting is all what we have seen. Drones are actually coming into play these days, and especially in the fixed asset verification, where you have large freehold property, either by way of land and all that. Drones are extensively used, and in some of the commercial applications for delivery, they have started using drones in a commercial way. Now, the risk of drones is they're all mechanical instruments and electronic instruments which can fail, so nobody can guarantee. So depending upon the size and nature of the drone, if it fails and falls into in a particular zone, what kind of a damage it can provide, either to the humans or to the vehicles or whatever, maybe on electrical lines, depending upon the route that the drone would take. That's what I mentioned about damage to property, human injuries, and all that. Cloud, again, pretty much majority of the risks that I talked about earlier would also get applicable. Will also get applicable here, and nothing but it's also a server. So whatever that gets applicable in the earlier cases would also get applicable. Security of the cloud environment will become more critical, more so when you outsource this. You're using an external service provider's cloud. Cloud strategy becomes again very, very critical, whether you want to use in-house, external, and how do you want to manage the entire security that you build around it. Information security and confidentiality again becomes extremely critical. Cyber threats. So when you have confidentiality issue, then a cyber threat and confidentiality both will go together and can create a problem for an organization. Now let us look at some of the audit considerations that you might want to look at. And this is a continuous thing. So the earlier slide and this is a continuous thing. So it is not specific to OCR or drones, but then I put pretty much listed all the areas that you might want to look at as an audit head to address some of these risks that I just mentioned here. So typically what should happen is that, when you do an audit, you might want to look at whenever an assessment is being done, it is being done by a composite team, both from the business process side as well as from your technical side. And similarly, whenever you have an audit person doing an audit of this area, you'd like to have somebody who truly understands the organization's business process, on which process which is managed by these IT solutions, applications, technology, whatever you call it, along with the technical team who understands that area. Because somebody who understands business continuity may not be an expert in cloud security. Somebody who understands cloud may not understand much about your cyber. So I think you need to have somebody who understands that domain and who has the domain expertise. And then you need to test various scenarios, and that's where the auditors would actually come in. You need to throw up what all can go wrong kind of a scenario and make sure that all those scenarios are tested. Because most times what happens is that you might throw up a scenario and somebody might say this is absolutely stupid. Let me give you an example. I might eat into my next speaker's valuable time. I'll just give you a small example. I was working for a telecom company and I newly joined. I was 6 months into that company, and for the first time we wanted to do a telecom switching audit. One of the questions I asked the technical team that was managing the switch was, how do you know that this switch is generating all the CDRs? They all laughed at me and said that you are not a technical guy. It is like asking somebody whether a human's heart is functioning or not. The very fact that a human is alive indicates that the heart is functioning well. I said, show it to me. I said, I do not, unless until I see it, I will not believe it. You presume a lot of things that, because your heart is functioning, somebody is alive. But you need to prove it to me that it generates all the CDRs that it generates. CDR is a call data record, which is a digital record of the call that is being made by an individual, which the switch monitors in a layman terms. And you'll be surprised. About 20% of the CDRs were not getting generated, and we proved it. They wanted us to prove that it is happening. They said that we are confident. We carried out a particular reconciliation. I don't want to get into the details as to what I've done. And when we did that, 20% of the CDRs were found to be missing. They sent it to Bell Labs in the US, which also confirmed, and they were surprised that this happened, and which resulted in a significant revenue loss. Similarly, I asked one more question. How do you know that whatever that the switch is generating, forget about the 20%, whatever little that 80% that it is generating, how do you know that it is reaching my billing system so that I can bill, I can rate them, I can bill them, and then invoice it to my customers? Even there we found CDRs were missing because they said, this is an IT protocol. If the entire batch doesn't get transferred, it will reject it. You know, all those technical explanations and reasons were provided. But when we proved that, when we checked the results, number of CDRs it got generated, number that actually reached the billing system, when we did the reconciliation, we found various CDRs missing. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is that you need to look at various scenarios. Some of them can be shooed away saying, you know, these are idiotic questions. Don't bother about it. What we are looking for is a logical answer. It might be an idiotic question, but every idiotic question would also have a logical answer. So what we are looking for is a logical answer. And do not shy away from asking all kinds of questions. And then you come up trumps. You learn a lot of things in the process. Data integrity validation checks. This is so very important. I spoke about data integrity. Whenever you use any application, any algorithm or rule, I think one of the things that we need to look at is that how accurate is the data which is being fed into the application and which is also coming out. Or even for our data analytics, we simply pull out a lot of reports and then we start analyzing it without even doing validity check. Data integrity validation is so very critical, especially in the audit space. Audit of unprocessed data. This is more specific to OCR. So what OCR typically does is that if it is unable to read a particular invoice or data, it puts it into a junk box. And then you need to actually periodically look at these, you know, every hour, half an hour, whatever that you decide, and look at as to why these are getting rejected, and then make those suitable corrections and then push it, or either you manually process it or you push it back into the system after making necessary corrections. Regulatory licensing requirements for use of drones. This is specific to drones. You know, you need to obtain licenses, and there are certain regulations which restrict use of drones in certain areas, in certain lines. How do you make sure, you know, you comply to all of that? Customer location, confidentiality of these customers, because typically what drones do is that they use lat-long data, latitude, longitude data, which we call as coordinates, location coordinates, to go and deliver either any of the products or services. So once you have those details, now what do you do with that data? How safe and secure is that information that you keep? Because it should not get misused by anyone tomorrow. Security architecture and governance framework becomes extremely critical. This is specific to cloud technology. Security architecture is again a very broad term that I'm using here. It could be your accesses, it could be a change management, it could be a secured coding, you name it, all of that would figure in this. Governance framework again is part of your access controls, your exceptions management, all of that. You know, how do you make sure that identity management, all of that would be covered under your governance? How do you make sure that only authorized people access? And then the other thing that you need to look at is that whether the organization has a mechanism for regular review and audit of some of these key applications and systems. And then you might want to look at the reports of those reports and identify if there are any critical issues which have been identified, how they have resolved, how the processes got changed or revised or updated. Now, I'll quickly look at this blockchain. Blockchain is an evolving technology. Some of the associated risks are all mentioned here. I'm trying to rush a bit because I don't want to, I think I'm already approaching the end time. So, which is around your data confidentiality, safety and security of the private key. I don't know how many of you are aware of blockchain. If you understand the basics, then I think this would make sense. Not too sure how many of you are exposed to blockchain technology? At least if you understand the basic part of this technology, then some of the audit considerations would be that, again, the first point that I mentioned about encryption and data confidentiality. While the data that you transfer, see, broadly, I'll tell you what it does is that blockchain will ensure the integrity of information or data. So insofar as confidentiality is concerned, while it encrypts the information which gets passed on to the various nodes or network parties, what we call whosoever is involved in that, whether it is private or public, everybody will get to see whatever the organization decides to make it public. Now, how that information can be used or misused, again, is dependent on those individuals. So what you need to encrypt, what is visible, should be looked at and should be on a need to know basis kind of a thing. But everybody would know. It's a distributed ledger, which means that everybody would have a copy of the entire list of transactions. Every node, every computer would have list of transactions. Therefore, data confidentiality becomes important. Like, for example, depending upon the nature of transaction, it could be contracts, which means you will have some of the key elements of the contract, who is or two parties to the contract. Right, all of that would have, but somebody may misuse. So I think whatever is the information that is contained in that block, which is encrypted, generally they are all encrypted, but then it would get decrypted at the nodes because they would have to look at that information data before they actually approve. They call it as a consensus, and before it gets added to the block. So this is a consensus model where so private key sharing. So every node would have its own. It's something like an identity. It's like a key to the door. So everybody would be issued, once you join the blockchain, everybody would be issued a private key, which is a key to access those transactions that get added to the block. A block is nothing but transaction. So now if somebody steals that key, now that can be misused. So how do you make sure that those keys are safe and secure? And they're all digital keys, so not a physical key. So, and you typically have a situation where somebody goes on a long leave or medical leave, and then we have this classical process of somebody delegating somebody's responsibility to somebody so that he or she manages the day-to-day operations in somebody's absence. So those are extremely dangerous in these situations, because then this blockchain cannot work. The blockchain's sole objective is to ensure integrity of the transaction. While it has certain benefits and certain what should I say, negative elements also. So I think both are there, but then this would seriously impact the integrity. Somebody can actually misuse. Transaction load assessment, because if you understand how it works, every transaction will be processed across all the nodes. And therefore, you need huge amount of bandwidth because it runs on internet. Blockchain primarily runs on internet, which means it requires huge amount of bandwidth. And every transaction, imagine that if you initiate a transaction and you approve it, or 2-3 people approve it, it's much smaller. But then every transaction goes through the entire chain of nodes. Then what happens, or network partners or parties in that block, in that chain, then obviously you'll have more number of people, more touch points, more data will flow through that bandwidth. So you need larger bandwidth and you need internet connection. So therefore you need to build redundancy so that at any point in time, if your net goes down, your operation should not stop. So you need to have adequate redundancies built in so that you can quickly switch over. Next comes PII. Again, we talked about the data confidentiality. You don't want any personally identifiable information or organizational sensitive information data get stolen. Again, this technology is, again, as I mentioned, is at a nascent stage. It's still evolving. People are still struggling. Even technology experts are still struggling with it to make sure that it is error-proof. And then it also has, while everybody believes that it is highly safe and secure, there's no denial about it, but it can still be breached. So that's something that one will have to keep in mind. So I'll quickly come to this, sir. I won't take much of the time. Now, these are again some of the thoughts based on the kind of digitization, the kind of risk landscape that we have seen in the earlier slides. These are some of my thoughts that I would like to share with you, that having worked in the technology space. Understanding the business is extremely critical. We need to understand how the business functions, where all it uses automation, where all it uses technology, nature of technology, how the technology landscape has evolved over a period of time, what are the challenges it is facing, what are the issues which have cropped up. Then dependencies, when you understand the business, you also understand the dependencies on some of these applications, technologies, people. So the next one I said, understanding the technology, products, hardware that support the business. So these are extremely critical, because once you identify them, you also understand what critical operations they provide and how do they support the business, and how critical are these to the organization. Mapping the information and data that is received, processed is extremely important, because once you identify some of these applications, hardware and all of that, you need to understand what does these applications and software do. What do they process? What comes out of it? How critical it is, and what kind of decisions are taken, and what happens if some of these applications go down? Would it adversely impact? To what extent it would impact? So those are the kind of questions that you want to look at as part of your risk assessment. Understand that people and process. We talked about technology. People and processes are extremely important. Do you have people who really understand? Do you have domain experts? Are they well trained? Do they understand do's and do nots? And do they perform their tasks at the appropriate time? And in terms of the processes, you name, like for example, upgrades, patches. Then comes your server hardening. Then your antivirus, firewalls. So they're all process related. So how do you make sure that these processes are running well, and whether these are automated? Then we talked about SIM in the earlier slide. And then incident management. So all those things are processes which also have a bearing on the people. Understand associated compliance requirements, because some of the organizations, some of the countries would have their own regulatory requirements in terms of archiving, storing, destroying information data. We call it as GDPR or privacy, right? So I think those need to be complied with. More so, when you have cross-border transfer of information or data. Then the other thing which is very critical is that when you look at some of these processes, you need to actually map and find out whether these are automated, whether these are semi-automated, whether these are fully manual. So we need to. So that is when you do a risk assessment, and you can actually draw your samples, or you can decide, or you can sharpen your focus in terms of where you want to look at what. Because when it is fully automated, you need to look at the rules, you need to look at input, output, and as we talked about consistency. And when you look at your change management logs, and if no changes have happened for the audit scope, then you only check about 2-3 samples, and then you validate the entire transactions for the entire period because of the consistency. Unless a lot of changes, a lot of modifications have actually happened, right? So I think that's the objective. And if it is manual, or wherever it is manual, then you follow a completely different audit approach. Then you need to look at whether they are in digital form, manual form, all of that. Incident reporting, investigation, closure. We talked about incident reporting in the earlier slide. Whenever there is an incident, it could be fraud, it could be intrusion, it could be somebody unauthorized access, whatever you call it. Somebody attempting multiple times to gain an entry into an application, we call it as social engineering. So, so some of these things, you might want, or tailgating when you look at physical security. So somebody reports these, then you need to investigate and find out exactly why is this happening, and whether there's a need for us to relook or re-engineer the existing process. Understand issues raised in the management assessments and audits. We spoke about this earlier. Tools and technologies implemented for exception management. We talked about SIM and some of these other intrusion detection, or if you have implemented continuous monitoring in a financial application, what kind of exceptions it is throwing up. So those are the things that you might want to seriously look at and see that how these exceptions have been closed, and whether you see these repeat exceptions, or those are one-time exceptions which came up as an exception, and then you do not see a recurrence of those exceptions subsequently. Effectiveness of the employee trainings in managing. See, most times what happens is that some of the exceptions cannot be closed immediately, because it requires probably a much more a higher level of IT intervention, and that typically takes time, or your OEM dependent. or you're waiting for a certain patch, then in those cases, if you feel that this is a critical or a high risk kind of an incident, then you need to look at what are the other mitigation actions that you put in place, which are temporary, but then you need to have some kind of fix, a temporary fix, so that you just cannot keep the door open and say that now I don't have anything, so I'll keep it open for the next few months. So that cannot happen. So make sure that you identify what those mitigation actions are, interim actions are. Then comes your effectiveness of employee trainings. We talked about it in the previous slide. So somebody will have to look at, so that tomorrow an employee should not come and say that neither there are manuals, neither have I been trained, but I have just joined. Those are the excuses which you typically hear whenever there's an incident. So you don't want to hear those kind of excuses. So you want to make sure that every employee is well trained in the areas that they, or in the applications that they are supposed to manage, or the technologies that they are supposed to manage, and make sure that you have the right person for the right job who really understands the risk landscape of that area. A risk assessment. So once you do all of this, you definitely will have to do a comprehensive risk assessment, factoring all of the above that we just mentioned. And wherever you think, there's a need for you to reperform, even though the management has carried out some of their own internal assessments, but then you think that, these are all critical events or issues or highly sensitive events, you might want to reperform some of these audits to make sure that the process now is robust and is able to detect. So that's why we do a lot of these penetration testing is typical one of those things, the red hats and all, green hats, red hats. You have all of that as part of your cyber testing, so that you actually simulate an attack and see that, how the system responds, how the people respond, how the security operating centers respond for a simulated attack. So you actually create downtime or simulate downtime. So we do all of that to see while you have a fantastic process on paper. So when an event actually happens, then how we talked about agility, how quickly you are able to detect and then fix that issue. So reperform audit for those critical ones. And this is the last one, real life scenarios is what I've said. We also do some of these things like, we load a particular application which is specifically designed, and then we upload it onto pen drives, and then we drop pen drives randomly to see how does the employee behave. Does he pick up and start using and plugging it? That's the most dangerous thing to do. Imagine if I have loaded some malware in that. I take charge of that laptop or computer, and then the entire organization will now get impacted. DDoS is what typically happens. That's exactly how denial of service, distributed denial of service. So, so those are the things that typically happen. So you look at the employee behavior, and this comes from constant training to see that, how the employee would behave in a particular situation. Now, this is again how the audits have evolved, and I think Limaya Saab had covered it in much more detail. It used to be cyclical recovery. Mind you, I started my internal audit in 1991 when everything was manual, and things have changed significantly over the period of time. And all 34 years that I spent was nothing but in internal audit, risk management, forensics. And I've seen how the function has evolved over a period of time. So now it is rolling audit plans, which means that every quarter you go back to the audit plan, you look at it, because nothing is cast in stone, and then see that whether the audit plan is still relevant, or whether you want to make certain changes based on the events that have occurred, or the changes that have happened during this period, from the time that you prepare the annual audit plan and the time that you would be initiating the audit. It used to be controls based, now it is risk based. IT reviews are mostly limited to ITGC. Now you know that there's everything under the sun. Now it could be privacy, it could be cyber, it is information security, business continuity, you name it. I think you have all of that. Apart, in addition to the ITGC. ITGC is primarily for your external auditor, because you need to place reliance on the numbers which are coming out of these applications. Therefore, you actually assess those applications so that you can place reliance on the numbers which actually come out to help you to certify those numbers as part of your external audit. IT assessments are limited to localized systems. Now, I think you have all kinds of things. They either sit within the premises, or they will be sitting some miles or thousands of miles apart, but still you do an assessment of it. it used to be periodic audit. So once in 2 years, once in 3 years, they're all cyclical, but then now you have continuous monitoring, so which is all exception based now. So which means that the systems and applications, wherever you have implemented, would constantly look at the transactions that are being processed, or look at events, and then throws up exceptions. We talked about SIM, we talked about continuous monitoring tools in the financial applications. It used to be very limited. You're limited only to Excel kind of a thing, limited use of tools. Now you have all kinds of things available today. You've got RPA, you've got bots, you name it. I think you have it. You have predictive available today. You have technologies, where you can actually choose your own random sampling. It also throws up exceptions. I think you have, even the technology has significantly evolved. So with this, I conclude my presentation. I know I have taken it, probably I would have overshot the time, but I would like to thank everybody. I would like to thank ICAI and the management for this opportunity. So thank you once again, and I would like to specifically thank Nandaji as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful session.
I need to rush because we didn't have adequate time. So pardon me in case.
No, it was very nice. It was very wonderful session, sir. And thank you for throwing your lights on how the technology is emerging in the audit area as well, and how this technology has removed all the human disruptions and limitations from here. But also the technology, if it also comes with a risk. But thank you so much for putting your light on also how to approach the audit in this risk environment. So thank you so much for that. So thank you. With this, moving on with this session, we have come to our third part of the session. We have with us CA M. Surendra Reddy as to share his expertise on the role of internal auditor and as an advisor. Mr. Surendra Reddy is a CA with 15 years of experience. He is also Bachelor of Commerce, and he has also certified under IFRS course conducted by ICAI. He is also partner in Guru and Jana. His specialization is in audit and assurance, statutory audit, internal audit, compliance audit, concurrent audit, forensic audit, SOP implementation, IFC design and implementation, and a special assignment industry covering e-commerce, retail and trade. Manufacturing, research and development, service industry, software industry, hospitality industry, infrastructure, and real estate, power generation in education industry. He has also He has also had a volunteer experience, and he is also joint secretary of Institute of Internal Audit at Bangalore chapter. So with this, I would like to welcome CA M. Surendra Reddy, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a minute, I'll put the presentation. You're able to see, right? Okay, good. And you're able to hear me very well? Okay. First of all, I would like to thank ICAI for giving the opportunity to share the expert on the internal audit as an advisory role. And I would also thank Nandaji and Mr. Mishra and Kaushik organizing the entire seminar for a couple of weeks. And especially today's speakers, Mr. Milind and Sharma sir spoke quite a lot on the agility and audit through the digitization. Definitely, I would also be drawing some attention, which they've also addressed some of the topics which I might touch upon here and there, but I won't go deep in those areas. But apart from that, as a internal auditor, how we can play as an advisory role for a lot of companies as the market emerges. I would be keep taking you through the slide by slide. Just one second. My presentation is there or gone?
It's gone, sir.
Okay. Right. Now, the slides are not changing.
Yeah, it is changing. It is changing.
No, initially, it was not changing. And probably the content that I would be speaking, a traditional internal audit approach, how we have been doing, and what is the need for change for our approach as an advisory role. And probably I'd also speak what are the different approaches we can apply in the internal audit so that we also play as an advisor to the lot of clients. And maybe I will also be running through a lot of surveys which are done by the department, and also like either IAA or PwC, certain surveys also I'll be depicting there in the presentation. And if you look at it, traditional internal audit focus, typically, if you look at it, providing an independent and objective assurance to the board, management, or an audit committee. That's what we used to do. If the focus on reviewing the efficiency of the company's governance and risk management and controls. Once we establish all this as an assurance, we used to provide through by way of an internal audit reports in the areas like controls, risk management processes, and governance. Typically, the traditional areas, this is what we used to cover. And how do we perform how we used to perform the traditional audits also, like it is a periodic audits where we used to cover the past data. Either it could be based on the what the company needs, either it could be quarterly audits or a monthly audits, and analyzing the past data, evaluating. And this way issues found and the kind of suggestions we might give it, it's no more relevant sometime in the current period. And typically, if you have to look at it, one of the e-commerce company where we are doing, and the past quarter that I audit, probably by the time we finish the entire audit, come to the board level of an audit, a board is to tell you, have you checked these issues today? Does it exist? Just not even past 2 months. Probably the management is to tell, we have done this implementation in the tech, we have done this correction, particular change. Probably I think I want you to go check whether these issues are still persist or already corrected. That means even the 2 months, sometime it can be too late, again, depending on the company to company. And probably we need to also take a cognizance towards the our audit approach when we ought to be an advisor in that area. And even in the methodology, the traditional approach that we will cover is internal audits rely on the traditional method of auditing, and still probably a lot of firms are not using the world of technology like data analytics, audit through the systems, and implementation of a lot of audit tools and such kind of things. And if you also look at the expertise, definitely we have the expertise of the knowledge, but do we have the technical knowledge in the respective areas? For example, if I'm doing in a construction audit, do I know the knowledge as a civil engineer what you should have had? Definitely we will not have. That's where we need to integrate. Like Sharma sir was telling, IT audits typically probably we used to only cover the ITCG, not beyond that. Probably how we will cover the entire gambit of IT and the risks controls. How do we measure? And those exercises in the traditional internal audits we were not covering. And if you look at the coverage part of it, internal audits are planned in a way that all the auditable units are covered in a year, and auditable units and the period it is covered, and to do that way the internal audits. And what we used to focus in while doing those audits also, maybe we used to look at a lot of compliance risks and IT risks. Again, IT risks is a minimal part of it we used to cover, probably ITGC, even some of them even never used to cover those ITGC controls also. And some aspects of operational risk and some aspects of financial risks that we used to cover. And that's where need is required to change in our audit approach in the internal audit. That's where I'm stepping in now. If you look at it, a lot of surveys which I would be presenting, this was one of the surveys done by the PwC, And if you look at it in 2020, almost 55% of the stakeholders expecting more from an internal auditors, expecting internal auditors and a trust advisor. Trust advisor, even if you look at 21, that itself has gone to 62%. Probably as you go, it could go to even 80%. And still, the traditional approach of audit will hold good some point, certain areas and certain things, but still, as a role of an advisor, how we can grow, what is the expectation of the stakeholders is very, very important for us to also understand. If you look at the IS function, spotlighted as stakeholders expect IA to help deliver more strategic values to them and also help them in organizing, evolve from these escalating challenges or making sure that the processes remain controlled, compliant, and efficient. It is as the technology changes, we need to look at all three integrated in the internal audit system when we, as a, they're expecting as a trusted advisor. Plus, a transformation agent needs also to be agile, which mostly million-dollar millions are also addressed how to be an agile auditor, plus a digitally enabled and risk-based approach, how we can integrate into our audit program is that is very, very important area. I think substantially covered by Sharma sir. I will not dwell upon that much, but as an advisor, we need to keep these things also in the mind for us to conduct as an internal auditor in that as a trusted advisory space. If you look at another survey, Asia Confederation of IAA, when they've done the survey in last year, if you look at it, any of the risk areas, if you take IT risk or a business continuity risk or a strategic risk, reputation risk, third-party risk, or a cybersecurity or a financial risk, every area, what as a audit, as a stakeholder, what they're expecting is a trusted advisory role. That is the part which green part depicts. And how do we achieve that? IA consistently guides the management and affected departments to address the key risks and to improve the company's various initiatives. Suppose as the business dynamics keeps changing, as an advisor, we need to also flow with them, audit them along with that as emerging technology and guide the companies also as a trusted advisory role. And maybe some of them would execute in the blue space. If you look at it, some relevant risk areas are covered, periodically provide the advice to them and cover some bit of it, but not very the way the industry is expecting. And probably some of the firms would only cover what is based on the need of a client. We will not go on advice beyond that. Whatever the scope that provided by the management, we will address. That is what the very, very low percentage. If you look at it, already the trend is getting quite a lot of change, because if you look at it, more than 80% is expecting the as a trusted advisor or a consultant. And if you don't gear up to this level, probably the companies would look for the different firms to attract this kind of a talent. And if you have to look at how it is impacted our own organization as a Gurujana, if you have to look at it, probably prior to 5 years, nobody was expecting us to play that advisory role. And as emerging now past 3 or 4 years, if you look at it, a couple of companies started looking at more concurrent, more frequent, more advising them, flow with their business and do an internal audit and define the entire role. I will take you through again those, and I'm only seeing the statistics part of it. And if you look at it now, 40 to 50% of the clients are expecting as an advisory role in their companies. And definitely, as I'm sure, next 2 years or 3 years, if you look at it, probably 80% of the clients would definitely move towards that approach. And I'll also take you through what is the different approaches to an internal audit. And if you look at it, the risk model, traditional risk model, how we used to cover finance risk or an operational risk or an compliant risk and IT risks may be moderately used to cover. We must prioritize the risk factors by importance to achieve the corporate objective and maybe meet the management, have the interviews with the management, arrive at what is their corporate objective, how are we can integrate our internal audit approach and the risk model approach based on the priorities of the corporate objective, what as a client which they want to achieve. Mostly the most of the corporates are expecting this today's world. And how do you also cover the risk universe? If you have to look at it, the auditor should understand how every risk they audit affects the achievement of a corporate objective. Whether whatever the risk that we're tackling through an audit, is it going to enhance the objective of the organization? Also, we need to keep it in mind. And another thing is in the audit universe, not just defining only to the units that we need to be covered or the periodicity of the covering and traditional risk factors. We need to also look at the other approaches would be to deconstruct the entire corporate objective again here, identify non-traditional areas where we need to cover. But probably if you have to look at non-traditional areas where the e-commerce and emerging trends, probably whatever the systems that they run, probably they keep rolling the different uh, revised softwares or whatever it is, and how are these getting tested? We should not roll out the software and find out the bugs as and when the customers are using and then trying to correct. Rather, at a system level, whether the client has done the required test controls and through an auditor also, provided we have a capability to do that, and whether we can also test that systems in a financial control angle and IT control angle, all the control angle, then they can push. And that way we can play a good role as an advisor, and client is also expecting not that once they roll out the system, then as a couple of months the data flows through that, and then we identify an anomaly, and rather than correcting, I think we need to be a proactive there. And again, as I said, management interviews, there are a lot of things that we can get to know through meeting the audit committee or the respective stakeholders, and understand their objectives, yearly plan, and can we coordinate our plans with their objectives. It could be a very, very important aspect of it that we need to keep it in mind in the advisory role as an internal auditor. And probably some of the examples which I can take you through: new IT infrastructure that we need to build to become an advisor, and restructuring the entire program, standardization and optimization of people, that what we need to look at it, re-engineering the entire audit system, exploration of the new markets also would be good, and some of the aspects of what we can outsource it when we don't have, with what people we can get into the roles and understand. Again, as I said, management philosophy also we need to understand from the client to play as an advisor. And probably different approaches where I'll take you through a lot of examples here so that people can appreciate what as a lot of clients that we have implemented. Very focused on in a single area approach, thereby tackle one area, identify issues in that particular area, and dwell deep, identify root cause for those issues, make a actionable suggestions to the client, and aid the client in implementation of that, and post that track progress until there is a visible improvement in the client. This is what we can bring it on through as an advisory role. When you try to pick too many areas in an internal audit, probably you may not be able to do the justification for all the areas that you are doing. Otherwise, you need to have a big team to deliver. There cannot be a focus. That's why in this particular company, what we did was we just identified the revenue and revenue cost related area at all. Almost like 1 year, we have done the internal audit there with a big team, all the stakeholders, which was the CFO is a part of the discussions always. We will have, it's like a concurrent way which we did, and every week we will have calls and we audit the current data, identify what is the top-down approach, who are the 80% of the revenue generated clients, identify, see what are the risks in this, what is the technology risks involved, what is the people risk involved, and what is the other transactional audit risks. Identify all these, and probably all the technology risks, how we go and tell the promoter, how you are going to prioritize the tech development, how will you bring all this technology related controls so that manual driven controls will not work for too long. Otherwise, you require a massive workforce to address all these issues. And when we closely worked with the management, could address a lot of issues, but still it has to emerge quite a lot. And then coming to the people issue and how each area to be audited and what issues that identify people issues, we have to train the resource there, the respective things, how they need to look at it, what there is in approval levels or whatever it is, how they have not been doing it, to make them understand the business also to them, and how they need to check their the process itself and approval process, their own line of defense in the system. And of course, we need to look at the transactions and how it has emerged, what is the percentage of it, errors. If you look at in the initial when we started the audit, probably if you look at 30,000 orders they had per day, which the industry, they were in the transportation industry, if you have to look at it. And when the purely tech enabled company, and again, it is a startup, of course. And when you look at it, under 30,000 orders per day, when we are auditing where the clients provide 80% of the revenue, if you have to look at it, when we are trying to look at, initially there were errors or whatever you call the issues relating to 12% of orders had in the beginning of the audit. And as we emerged, probably 8 months later, 9 months later, when we completed the entire assignment for that particular area, today it is only 0.12% of the issues that we can find out. That should be addressed through the tech, plus with a lot of trainings and with the transactions and orientation towards the audit. And later we picked up the different areas. Again, when you cannot overlook completely that controls whatever we are placed, whether it is financially working. Then later what we need to also do is track the progress in real time. And probably every quarter, again, that function is some level of dipstick study is done and understand whether the controls have been working, whether the trainings is working, whether a lot of employee turnover is happening, whether the new members which are coming into that roles are able to understand, still keep that whatever the control mechanism that were working through earlier, whether it is still functioning or not, also has to be assessed by way of tracking real-time progress also. That can be periodically defined. It can be monthly or a quarterly or a yearly, whatever it is, depending on the size of the issue that we need to identify. And another, the biggest thing that we have to make a part of our team is employing experts in the team. That's very, very, very important aspect of it, especially in this like a technology-driven companies, or if you look at it, a construction or an engineering or an IT related companies, people need to understand. We can understand the financial part of it and control part of it, some extent of the ITGC part of it. Suppose if I'm doing an audit of a construction industry, how do we do a measurement, or in a big infrastructure industry where they lay the roads and all those things? How do we understand the measurements? What is the qualitative aspects of the road construction? Are they doing that? And if you are outsourced this activity to a third party, whether the third party is doing the right qualitative approach or a building or whatever it is, especially in the construction industry, if you are doing in a company, the most majority of it, it is outsourced like an L&T, big companies. How do you audit all these measurements, whether the right payments are made to the REA bills? Therefore, you would require a civil engineer sort of a person who can understand this in your team. But can you afford all of them? Definitely no. Probably you should look at a retainership and arrangement sort of a thing. Then we were auditing one of the company called they do manufacturing and setting of the lot of interior designing for a lot of corporates. When we were doing that, we got them, especially interior design specialists who understand our approach and looking at, again, when it was outsourced to contractors, whether they're doing the right way of doing it, right quality, right measurements. As a client, whatever that they're outsourced got the delivery of a value. Because as the design change and the process change, whether a lot of non-tender items keep coming, whether it is valid or is the client is taken for a ride, a client expect from an auditor to play that role, whether they got the delivery of the product, what they're supposed to get, and have they paid what they were supposed to pay, or they've excess paid, because it's the contract runs into crores. Especially in this particular two companies, when we did that, when we employed, there's a substantial cost savings which we brought in purely because we engaged the expertise people in that particular relevant technology area. Otherwise, we would not deliver. We would understand, depending on our experience, the kind of companies that we audited. But still, if you need to go to the specifics of like measurements, on the client's place, we could see if there is a false roofing. Above the false roofing, you definitely cannot measure what is the width of the and what level the false roofing is there. And suppose if they're putting a wallpaper or a painting, they can only do the measurement from the false roofing to the below. But the contractor had charged even the above false roofing. And as a normal auditor, we can definitely not identify these kind of issues. That's where the experts play a very, very different role. And next topic, when we have to come, we should be quite agile, and what systems, what automation that we can bring it to the client. In advisory role, client will also expect that. Maybe especially in the startup space, or the client is emerging with a new technology or a new area of a business, we need to also see how the systems are, whether automated or the lot of manual function is there, whether only the manual controls is there, or you have a detective controls or an automated control important. When too many manual controls are there, probably for some time it can work. Where the organization grow, it may not work. That's where the automation is very, very plays a vital role. Especially in that particular company, we have to give an example. They were also into manufacturing, and because the product that they manufacture, which is shelf-life products, within 3 or 4 days, what I manufacture today, I'll go and deliver it into across the retail shops or a modern trade or whatever it is. Now, probably if you look at it, in each city, they used to probably go to 8,000 or 10,000 shops every day, deliver with their vehicles. And when we engage with the client and we're talking, how do you go and deliver? How do you identify the sequence in which he has to go and deliver into shops? They were not using any automated tools. Then we told them there can be a route optimization which you can do through the Google Maps and whatever the technology that we can use through. Or a client asked, can you demo certain routes and show it to us? When we did it, the client was extremely happy. And then we could do it for the entire organization. Thereby, a substantial cost savings came, people cost came down, even all the vehicle running cost and diesel cost, everything came down. They could see definitely a visible saving in a client. That's where we can bring it a lot of automation into the client. And as an auditor, would I know all these tools? Definitely we may not. That's where, if you look at it, having a person, and this part of it, something called a purple person. Who is the purple person? A person with a CA and some bit of a technology knowledge. Even you may not know completely. That's where we engage a technology specialist, IT specialist, or some sort of a consultant, identifying this particular issue, whether there is a tool, automated tool, if you are not able to provide, is available. In fact, there is another client which we are looking at, where they deliver food across Bangalore, and they have to get orders on everyday basis in a piece of a paper, and probably the 200 places which they have to deliver. What is the number of people that they'll be there for tomorrow? And it was becoming very, very tedious for them to get that into what they've written in the sheets and bring it in Excel sheet, from there transpose into the manufacturing, by the time they give the data to the team who has to prepare that food for tomorrow and distribute accordingly, it was becoming extremely difficult. Then we said the client, through this kind of a technology, we can easily build a system for you and given access to even the person, their clients, that they feed in the just data and the respective place for how many meals that they need to supply, so that the data flows very fast to the team and their planning can be quite smooth. Otherwise, there is a possibility of the excess food prepared based on the past records and quite a lot of things that getting wasted also. The cost optimization, the entire manufacturing process can be also simplified through that automation tools that we can give it. That's where we need to be quite agile or understand the client uh, quite well, that industry, the technology that they use is very, very important. That's where I was telling in the previous slide, engaging or meetings with the top stakeholders is very, very important, even at a board of the directors or an audit committee, and what is their future plans, how it can be controlled. Next is the, are we giving the industry best practices? Also, we need to analyze as an advisor. Auditor can also do a research, industry, best practices, or within your clients, but definitely not revealing the confidentiality of a client. Confidential information should not pass on. Again, how do you build that system within your organization? Either couple of partners or the team that who leads should know the various fields, what are the technologies available, what are the best practices available. You need to have a source of a sort of a library and a case study where these people can understand everything periodically, so that the similar issues are identified, or what are the best practice that we can bring into that particular organization is very, very important, so that we have to enable ourselves to see how we can deliver this. Definitely quite a lot is spoken on the data analytics piece also. We can also leverage data analytics to gain valuable insight into the operations, to identify areas of our focus itself. We can arrive through the data analytics, and having a purple person in a team is quite important. This is where the purple person is the CA with a lot of tech enabled. In our organization, definitely every particular audit, there is one of the purple person or a data analyst specialist is available. And whenever we need to do the IT controls, those people also flow into at that particular time to the team, whichever the quarter we cover that, and complete that area and go back. To building all this, team is also important in our organizations to, if we need to deliver what the client is expecting. And some bit also spoken what data analytics can do, and examining like a large data, identify anomalies, trends, and risks, indicators for a risk evaluation and a root cause analysis, which can be helped quite a lot. And gathering the related data from multiple sources and multiple systems to provide a persuasive evidence as the basis for the conclusion, rather than sample testing and saying that this is the possibility of it, what the outcome which we can, rather than telling that, we can give a persuasive evidence and a good basis for a conclusion also. Then we can also processing the data, covering the whole population of a transactions and other master data instead of a sampling methodology. And we can link various other data. So for example, if you have to put across, there is one company where a lot of incentives are paid. And for example, that there is a specified number of calls that you need to attend, and based on that only, you can get an incentive. Now, we observed when looking at the data where biometric data, where he was in office versus the data for the incentives, there are a lot of anomalies. People were absent, but he is getting a incentive, but simply telling that I've called so many number of people. Now, even though when you're setting something like that, the goal for him, how do you check that whether he's achieving that goal? Through only tech-enabled, we can establish all this. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult. That's why data analytics can play a very good role in our advisory role also. If you look at it, the green where all the places, all the areas where they've implemented the data analytics, and all key areas are moderately or rarely. Again, this is also a statistics given on the Asia specific configuration of IIA. And again, another survey where they're circulated to the various stakeholders in the organization and asked what is the critical things that you would require an auditor to play as a role. If you look at the green patch, that is the where all of them said, even in the past 5 years also, or even the next 5 years also, emerging trend, if you require, advise the management to improve the organizational internal controls. This is where it is growing. And next highest, if you have to look at it, assurance over an organizational internal controls. That's the survey what that it depicts. Then other green patches, oversight on existing controls, policies, and recommendation in the implementation. That's where what they would require. And as an internal auditor, probably if you do an audit, identify all the issues and give a report and tell them, probably client might not know how to implement. That's where they expect an advisory role, giving a suggestion in the training aspect, or it could be bringing the different tools for them, giving giving the identifiable implementation plan, and whether the implementation plan is also working for them or not. A result-oriented approach, if you take it, I think as an advisor, you can do a wonderful job to the client. Again, if you look at whether an audit firm, emerging technologies, whether they have been available to them, probably majority of them, GRC, a lot of them implemented, still no for a lot of them. Data analytics, quite good percentage, 30% still they're not doing. Agile auditing, probably 42%. This is where I think we can evolve quite a bit. And cloud computing, I think they are too far. Probably very few people are doing it. A lot of them are not doing. RPA probably still to grow quite a lot. Again, Sharma sir was speaking on that. I think that's where very structured data is there. That's where our RPAs can also be developed, and it's very costly. But whether we need to also look at sort of a client, whether it absorb that particular cost, what it is, and other things. And again, if you look at it, what could be the requirements to thrive in an advisor role here? If you look at it, outcome-driven audit, which we'll have to look at it, value-driven approach. That's what I gave certain examples. I can go on giving a lot of other examples as required. What sort of value that we have given? Even some of the malls where there are a lot of deployment of manpower that is required in case of you have to look at it from the point of view of the valet drivers, or if you can look at the manpower that required for the housekeeping or the security. We had done a survey looking at through the lot of data, what is the inflow of walk-ins with the weekends and the holidays, and in a day, different days, maybe the master role should be defined based on that, so that the manpower we can utilize effectively, and so that the cost reduction also can be there. We need to be very quick and interactive with the management, iterative to the various confining plans to the client. And continuous communication with the stakeholders also very important to understand their problems, not sticking on to our own audit approach. That's where agility can also bring in a lot of cohesiveness between the client and us. Again, as it is called internal auditor, even though as an external auditor playing a role, but there is a thin line of difference. We don't step into their issue, but however, how we can still work together but through a communication. And next is the transparency and alignment and the decision making, and impact over thoroughness. And if you have to look at it, impact over thoroughness. And rather than doing a thorough audit, how impactful that we can deliver an audit. can we still apply that 80-20 rule wherever it is in the client which we were looking at? If you whatever the audit we were doing for 1 year, the 80% of the revenue clients when you tackled, automatically rest of them also got much more organized and just in time. That's very, very key. Are we looking at a too fast data, or are we looking at very current trends and current data? As I said, in a particular client, even the 2 months data for him was irrelevant when we were trying to give them. That's where we need to. It has to be a client by client, and probably one size cannot fit all of them. And at the same time, we need to see client is also able to absorb that. And collaborative approach, take the journey with our client. As I said, through the communication. If we need to achieve good quality internal audit with a value-driven point, it has to be a collaborative approach. And client also should not have any restrictions, data restrictions, authorization levels. And a lot of times, some of the clients even come back and say, no, I'll not give you the live system. And only the financial system, if you audit where you're not auditing the source data, I don't think we can add a value to the client. Definitely, those are the clients. They're not expecting you to play a role as an advisory, but that's okay for us. Mix it up a little bit, break some eggs, don't put all the eggs in one basket, and how we can again bring a lot of agility and challenge that this way all also can be done is very, very important aspect of it. And probably my last slide here. As a role of an internal auditor, we need to also play an assurer and assessor also in certain aspect of it. Then how do we play as an advisory role? Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think thank you for the patient hearing.
No, it was very, very wonderful session, sir. Nice presentation. Very nice presentation, sir. We learned a lot actually how from the given trends which you showed how from 2020 to 2021 as an internal auditor the advisory field has increased. How much requirement as we are getting okay advisors on this matter also, that matter also, and etc. And with the trend we actually see that yes, it is happening. And by that we have to actually change our approaches. As traditionally, as you said, there were different four brackets which we used to check, like compliance, IT, etc. And how in this environment we have to change and adapt new approaches, be with more talk to more management, how not only giving the issues but also advising them what to do to resolve those issues. So thank you so much, sir, for these beautiful insights. Thank you. Also, yes, thank you so much. Moving on, I would like to introduce CA Gyan Chandra Mishra, our Central Council member of ICA and Vice Chairman. Actually, is he here?
Do we have any question answers?
Yeah, actually, yes, the question answers were basically, we didn't had much questions here. There is only one thing for giving more examples by Babani Shankar Paul. I think that was regarding the re-engineering of the audit for very first session. That was that. Other than that, there is no other questions as such.
Okay.
Yes. So moving on, I think we have come to end of this session. And I would like to introduce Kaushik sir to giving some vote of thanks.
Thank you, all the speakers, Naveen sir, Sharma ji, Reddy sir, for sparing your time and taking out and taking the internal audit in detail on various aspects of internal audit, and which is very relevant in these times. And definitely, people who attended, they would have definitely got more insights about this. And definitely, it was a very wonderful session, and I hope all have gained out of these sessions. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your time and efforts. Thank you so much.